Welcome back to the Daily Poem. I'm David Kern, and today is Friday, July 2nd, 2021. Today's poem is by an American poet who won the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize. Mary Oliver, who lived from 1935 to 2019, was, of course, one of our country's most beloved poets, especially during the last quarter century of her life. And the poem that I'm going to read today is called The Riders. I was pointed to it by someone online on social media, and I went back to try to figure out who it was, and unfortunately, I could not find the original post. So I want to give that person out there in the Twitter sphere credit for posting this poem. I screenshotted what they post and I liked it so much that I wanted to share it with you. It's called The Riders. It goes like this. When the Pony Express needed riders, it advertised a preference for orphans. That way, no one was likely to ask questions when the carriers failed to arrive, or the frightened ponies stumbled in with their dead from the flanks of the prairies. This detail from our country's past has no particular significance. It is only a footnote. There were plenty of orphans, and the point, of course, was to get the mail through, so the theory was sound. And besides, think of those rough, lean boys. How light and hard they would ride, fleeing the great loneliness. As with so many of Mary Oliver's best poems, and as with many of the best poems ever written, this poem ends with a deep and subtle surprise. The pathos of this poem builds progressively. The way Oliver writes the poem, the way she structures the lines, reveals as the poem progresses what her themes are. So, for example, she has a line that ends, to ask questions when the carriers failed. So to imply, inevitably these carriers were going to fail, and thus they needed someone who was expendable. 2 lines later, it talks about how the frightened ponies stumbled in with their dead, which then the line enjambs into the next line, from the flanks of the prairies. But it builds the tragedy of these characters, the seeming hopelessness of the circumstances. And then there's this period there, and the second half of the poem begins by telling us that this detail from our country's past has no particular significance. It's only a footnote. And then she says that there were plenty of these orphans, and we had to get the mail through, so the theory was sound. The philosophy, the economic need behind advertising for orphans theoretically makes sense, she says. But of course, in stating it so positively, in that affirmative mode, she reveals the true gruesomeness of the concept itself. And the notion that this detail from our country's past has no particular significance, that is only a footnote, is ultimately a deep and perpetual tragedy. And then she gives us the end. And besides, she says, think of those rough, lean boys. She gives us an M dash, and it says, how light and hard. And you begin to think there for a second, oh, well, there's these young guys, they're lean, they're strong, and they're light. And so the horses could carry them faster. But then it says how light and hard they would ride. They're the best man for the job, she seems to be saying. But then there at the end, they're riding light and they're riding hard because they're fleeing a great loneliness. It makes me think of the desert. They're riding across a dusty, empty desert, perhaps chased by, enemies, pursuers of all kinds. People who want to, protect their own land, or who want to take the mail from them and whatever's in that mail. And there they are riding across the dusty desert, being pursued, running away from the danger. And yet, even when they're not running away from the danger, they're running away from a great loneliness. And the fact that they're running away from a great loneliness is what makes the theory sound. It's a heartbreaking poem. There's so much there. And so I wanted to share it with you. For some reason, this might seem a little counterintuitive, but for some reason it felt like a poem to read before the Friday, before the 4th of July. I'm still working out in my own mind and heart why it felt like I should read it before the 4th of July. So if it seems like the wrong choice for you, please forgive me. But here is Mary Oliver's The Riders once more. When the Pony Express needed riders, it advertised a preference for orphans. That way, no one was likely to ask questions when the carriers failed to arrive, or the frightened ponies stumbled in with their dead from the flanks of the prairies. This detail from our country's past has no particular significance. It is only a footnote. There were plenty of orphans, and the point, of course, was to get the mail through, so the theory was sound. And besides, think of those rough, lean boys. How light and hard they would ride, fleeing the great loneliness. This has been the Daily Poem, which is presented by Goldberry Studios. Post-production is by Logan Green. I'm David Kern. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back on Monday with another poem for you.